All right, good afternoon. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Nick Brown. I'm the United States Attorney for the Western District of Washington. I am pleased to be joined today by a number of our partners from the law enforcement community to talk about a significant law enforcement operation that has lasted many months but culminated in the last couple days. With me today, standing up here, is Special Agent Kelly Smith, the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the FBI, Jake Galvin, the Acting Special Agent in charge of the DEA, Chief Adrian Diaz, the new Chief of the Seattle Police Department, and Special Agent in charge Robert Hammer from HSI. Yesterday, law enforcement officers and agents in this district executed court-approved search warrants at 14 different locations, both here in Washington State and in California. Multiple arrests were made involving 3 interconnected drug organizations. As a result of those arrested yesterday, 11 people are now in custody. And in addition to a related case in September, we arrested 6 others on a separate indictment, meaning we now have 19 people charged related to these 3 different drug trafficking groups. In the various searches that were executed yesterday, we seized more drugs, but most importantly, a number of firearms. 67 seized yesterday, bringing the total number of firearms seized as a result of this investigation to 110. These defendants were using firearms to protect massive amounts of drugs being brought into this district in Western Washington. Fentanyl, methamphetamine, heroin, and others. And during the course of the investigation, when law enforcement stopped vehicles or took off an RV carrying loads of drugs, these defendants were not deterred. When the first group was charged in September, and it was clear that law enforcement was using federally approved wiretaps to support this investigation, it did not deter their conduct. Investigators indeed heard the members of the groups talking about their occurring efforts to recruit more individuals to this work. I want to tell you a little bit about how these cases unfolded. In early 2021, one of the lead defendants in this case hit the law enforcement radar, and over the next year, we obtained court-authorized wiretaps to tap their phones related to the drug trafficking organization. One thing that we discovered early on is that there was more than one groups that were source of the supplies of these drugs into this district. So law enforcement officers started working on identifying the various sources of supply, and ultimately it led to that group being identified and the arrest in September and then earlier this week. While the sheer quantity of drugs and some of the pictures of the drugs that were seized are here today may stick in your mind, the numbers that motivate us, that motivate our law enforcement officers, is something else. As of mid-October of this year, there have been 743 confirmed or suspected drug overdose deaths in King County alone. Of those confirmed deaths, about 68% are linked to fentanyl. It's just October, but we have already exceeded the total number of overdose deaths during last year. Fentanyl is linked to 389 deaths last year, and this year fentanyl is already linked to 462 of those deaths. I want people to recognize, and that means everyone in this community, that we are facing a serious crisis. And while the cases that this office brings and the cases that our law enforcement partners investigate help slow down the flow and help save lives, I think we all recognize that given the gravity of the problems that we're facing, that the law enforcement piece is only a temporary part of the solution. In order to seriously address the crisis that this community and indeed communities across the country are facing, it takes multiple entities, multiple organizations, multiple actors to really make this a safe and healthy community. It takes much more than law enforcement. But I am excited about the work that we have done in this district and stopping these particular organizations. I want to thank not only the individuals here, but our partners in California, including HSI in Los Angeles, for their work on this investigation and helping to execute all of the search warrants and arrest warrants yesterday. But here in this district, the FBI took the lead on the investigation, so I want to turn the podium over to Special Agent Smith.
First of all, thank you for joining us today. I'm honored to be here with our counterparts from the DEA the Seattle Police Department, and HSI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. This effort would not have been possible without our partnerships. Yesterday's operation emphasizes our continuing commitment to the community to counteract the large volume of illegal drugs and firearms that are being trafficked into our community and targeting the sources of supply. The Paleo and Gutierrez Valencia drug trafficking organizations came to our attention in 2020. They were transporting large shipments of narcotics into our area from Mexico. We were able to build a long-term investigation, and parts of that are still ongoing. We interrupted, as I mentioned, several massive shipments, and ultimately seizing those drugs and dismantling those organizations will negatively affect the sources of supply here in the Seattle area. I also wanted to emphasize the large scale of this operation. Behind each of these agency representatives up here in front of you are literally hundreds of law enforcement officers and employees working to keep our communities safe. Just for yesterday's operation, we had more than 100 personnel from the FBI, and I know there were more than 300 in total executing our takedown. And this work didn't begin or end with yesterday's activity. As the U.S. Attorney's Office mentioned, these investigations takes months and years, and you can notice that this one was over a year and a half. The amount of methamphetamines and fentanyl removed from Western Washington during this investigation quite likely prevented some of these overdose deaths. I'd like to point to you this poster. This shows you just a small amount. That's 1 kilo of fentanyl powder. And as you'll hear a little bit later today, that is just very small amounts are deadly. The Washington State Department of Health reports that each day 2 people die of opioid-related deaths in Washington. Often mixed with other illicit drugs, many users are even unaware that they are ingesting fentanyl. Drug trafficking organizations feed upon the most vulnerable in our society and continue a devastating cycle of violent crime and addiction that destroys families, communities, and our individual quality of life. Together with law enforcement across the country, we're committed to disrupting these organizations, combating this crime, and reducing the availability of illicit narcotics. I'll now turn it over to Jake Galvin from the DEA.
Good afternoon. As you said, my name's Jacob Galvin. I'm the acting special agent in charge for the DEA here in Seattle. First, I'd like to thank Assistant Special Agent in Charge Rob Saccone and Group Supervisor Dan Murphy, who oversaw this investigation for us. The amount of narcotics seized in this investigation was staggering. In the first half of the investigation, together we seized 330 fake fentanyl pills. Our DEA lab finds that 4 out of 10 of those pills contain a lethal dose of 2 milligrams or more of fentanyl. If you take into account those numbers and the amount of fentanyl seized in the first part of this investigation, that's enough fentanyl to kill over 132,000 people. To put that in perspective, that's the amount of people that it would take to fill Lumen Field twice. Fentanyl is the DEA's #1 priority. The cartels that are responsible, they're ruthless, as we've seen by the amount of firearms seized in this investigation. And they're relentless and adaptable, as we've seen by, not only did we seize 1 RV filled with narcotics, but we seized 2. The cartels will also exploit any means necessary to get their deadly drugs into American communities. This investigation shows, with the partnerships that you all see here today, how vital our partnerships are to keep our communities safe, healthy, and free of dangerous narcotics. Thank you. Chief Diaz.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for all being here. I've stood in front of you many times to talk about the serious problems plaguing Seattle's communities. I've talked about the increase of guns, the shots fired, and shooting assaults, and the fentanyl that is violently harming our communities. People continue to fill our neighborhoods with drugs and guns, and they prey on and victimize all people indiscriminately. And members of all of the communities are dying, as people mentioned, as we have in this photo over here of just how many overdoses that we're experiencing. We know this, and we see this every single day. I'm proud of our officers and detectives committed to making a difference in addressing crime every single shift. Saving lives is why SPD is devoted to getting firearms out of the hands of criminals and illegal narcotics off the streets. Not only do I applaud the officers and investigators, but also the special workers like our SPD detection dog, Devin, who is actually up in the corner of this photo with a bunch of the drugs, the narcotics canine who helped sniff out some of the drugs in this week's massive roundup. This life-saving work is important, especially right now. This week, a city audit reported that an increase in methamphetamines throughout the use of Seattle. And as ASA mentioned, that we have 468 fentanyl-related deaths, and we're on pace to surpass last year's record high fatal overdose numbers. But we're also expected to exceed the number of guns SPD has recovered or took into custody in 2019, when we had 400 more officers. So we know how many guns are out in the streets. They're running rapid, and we've got to be able to address that. And having over 100 plus guns just in this operation is massive. Criminals with guns are ending far too many innocent lives, as we saw last week when a gunman shot and killed a beloved Central District store owner, as well as a youth football coach. And here in Seattle, year to date, shots fired are up 26%. We've had 633 shots fired compared to 501 last year. And yes, thanks to our ongoing local and federal investigative partners, dozens of those weapons have been rounded up recently, in the recent weeks, including these firearms that have been taken from an actual home in Ballard. We don't have a picture up on the board, but these are just some of the weapons. These joint operations will certainly save lives, but we all need to do more. And as I walk and drive the streets of Seattle, I often witness as desperate people slumped over with aluminum foil still in their hand, unconscious from a dose of fentanyl. And I know you've seen them too. And yes, our recent arrests and seizures will go a long way to keeping some drugs out of some of the people's hands. However, all city, county, and state agencies need to come up with a comprehensive and coordinated plan to hopefully help address this public safety crisis. And law enforcement, including those that are standing in front of you today, cannot do this work alone. We need to support our partners in public health, education, community services, and private sectors to come up with ways to prevent people from turning to guns and illegal drugs for their livelihood, for an escape, or for whatever reasons motivate them. Because these behaviors are killing them. And yes, the months-long efforts of SPD, DEA, FBI, HSI, U.S. Attorney's Office, and our other partners in this operation resulted in many arrests and seizures. But now I have a message to those who are still out here harming our neighborhoods. We will arrest you. We will come after you if you continue to hurt people. It might not be today or tomorrow, but we will not rest until we address those that are preying on our loved ones. And to our Seattle community, we all need you. We need all of you. We need our entire community to educate each other about the dangers and how to avoid them. Today, we've seen law enforcement in the battling rise in deadly drugs and guns. And I ask all of you, what are you doing now? Thank you.
I want to make two final points, and then we're happy to answer questions. One, as Special Agent Galvin was talking about, the first half of this investigation received 330,000 pills of fentanyl. 330,000. And he talked to you a little bit about how many of those pills likely contained a deadly amount. The other thing I want people to think about is that this investigation and the seizure of drugs and firearms, this is happening right here in our neighborhoods. The chief mentioned the activity in Bothell. The picture of those firearms were seized at a home in Ballard, not too far from here. Law enforcement yesterday executed a number of arrests about a mile from where I live in West Seattle. This is all around us all the time, and people need to be vigilant and diligent of this problem and take it very, very seriously. But it's not only here in Seattle, it's certainly not only here in King County, all up and down the I-5 corridor in the Western District of Washington. We are seeing communities devastated by the impacts of fentanyl in particular and firearms especially. And this is a problem that spans across this district, across this state, and across this country. So thank you very much. We're happy to take questions.